everybody, so I want to talk about the language of video. Ultimately, a video is a communication tool, and it is very much like a conversation that is happening to you. And because that's what's going on, videos actually follow the rules of conversation. What I mean, if I can just demonstrate right now, is if I was talking to you like this the entire time, right, where you're just seeing the side of my face, and that's all this conversation becomes, it would be very off-putting because I'm not acknowledging you. I'm not speaking to you. I'm actually pushing you off to the side of me. Does that make sense? So that's what I mean. What I mean is essentially that you feel about the conversation, about the person you're listening to, very similarly and in much the same way as you would with an actual conversation with that person, because you're coming into this experience with that expectation, because you understand that's how you need to be communicated with, okay? So that's the layer. That's what I mean by it's a communication tool. It operates like a conversation with the audience. However, film also operates on the subconscious level. A film is very much like a dream. The closest thing we have to our normal day-to-day experience of a film is dreaming. And because it so closely matches with how we dream, with how we experience dreams, within time, within dreams, with how we're able to just like move from one location immediately to a different location. That sort of dreamlike sense of time and place is one-to-one sort of how we experience films and how we watch films and the expectation we have when we watch a film. So as an audience member, you're coming in when you're watching a film with two different expectations of how it's going to communicate to you. You expect it to communicate following your cultural social codes of a conversation, of communication, right? And you also expect it to communicate the way that you experience a dream, to experience it in that sort of way. Okay, so because we have these two different layers of communication, both the conscious layer and the subconscious or unconscious layer, right? I believe that there's at least three different ways that a video or a film is actually communicating to the audience. So within the conscious layer, there's about two different ways that it is communicating to you, and there's at least one way that it communicates to you subconsciously. Consciously, you have direct communication and indirect communication. So direct being what is spoken, right? And indirect is ultimately what is not directly spoken, but what is implied. It's still being communicated. The audience is still understanding it and still absorbing it. You're just not beating them over the head with it because you're showing them respect, okay? And then you have, in the subconscious level, because it is like a dream, it also communicates with the language of dreams, not just with the language of conversations, but with the language of dreams. So it communicates to us symbolically and metaphorically, okay? So you've got direct communication, indirect communication, and symbol and metaphor. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a scene from Plague on the Practice, right? We're going to look at about a minute of that scene, and it's going to happen between the 6 minute and 31 second mark all the way to the 7 minute and 27 second mark. So we're going to watch that, and then I'm going to talk you through these different layers of communication and how the film is actually communicating at each layer within that minute scene, so you can understand what I'm talking about and it doesn't just sound super weird, okay?
I mean, here in our office, our patient volumes have dropped, a third at least, a half probably, so anywhere from 33 to 50%. So if you look at that, I'm going to be bringing in 50% of the money that I used to bring in. Well, that doesn't cover our overhead. So we're delaying purchases, we're paying more for equipment now. If we get personal protective equipment, we're paying more for that. And I either needed to let somebody go, which I did not want to do, because the staff has been with me for a very long time, or, they all got together and decided, they wanted to share equally in that. And so we give people more time off now.
All right, so what's happening at this point of the film? This point of the film is essentially sort of like the dark night of the soul of our character, right? So Dr. McNabb is going through just the really starting to unpack the problem, but the consequences of the problem for us. So as he's talking about the patient volumes and how the patients have dropped off, you're seeing images of an empty waiting room. You're seeing images of empty exam rooms, right? So he's directly saying patients have dropped off, but then you're also seeing the B-roll also directly communicating this sort of sense of emptiness. But then we hit you with a shot, which is essentially this shot right here, which is center framed, where you get a sense of this long hallway, right? This just tunnel, and then at the very end of it is Dr. McNabb, but he's super tiny. So now we're using this one shot to communicate symbolically and metaphorically the weight on Dr. McNabb and the fact that he now feels small and this problem feels big, right? Even from just the symbolic language of the feeling like you're looking for a light at the end of the tunnel, right? So this whole imagery of tunnel, right? Like that shot was specifically selected within the edit to be a sort of punctuation mark to what he's talking about. So now he's unpacking the emotions about his staff and needing to now consider whether or not he needs to let somebody go, but also considering the fact that they don't have enough money to buy personal protective equipment, but they also don't have enough money to keep everyone at the same hours on the same pay, right? So in order to emphasize that, now as we're beginning to move into discussing this topic, we're now using anchoring images of the staff all working together. Now we're speaking indirectly, right? And what we're indirectly saying is his staff is important. He hasn't directly said my staff is super important to me, right? We are communicating the importance of his staff indirectly by showing that they all have a very important role to play in the office. You're not seeing anyone sitting idly around because no one was sitting idly around because he needs all of them. To sacrifice one of them means to put the whole practice at risk, right? So we're using this now as an indirect form of communication to emphasize the direct form of communication. So then when we get to about 7:15, now he's actually directly saying he is considering letting somebody go. So about 30 seconds before we get to this mark, I've already primed your mind to now seeing this staff working together and seeing them together, each doing their part. So now as we repeat that, that's more of like, I planted that seed, it's bringing it to mind again, and now it's being directly communicated instead of indirectly communicated. And because it was planted earlier, it's going to be more solidified in your mind when you're seeing it now. This is the part of the scene that I'm really excited about, because essentially you have this decision of like how they all came together and talked amongst themselves that they would get more time off right now, right? But we know that no one ultimately wants to have that conversation, right? None of us want to have that conversation where we have to actually talk about like not working as much, right? And even though they understand, right, even though we would understand the situation, we would still not feel good about it. And because we can't blame a disease, right, the easiest thing to blame in that situation would be our boss, right? Would be the person laying that down. So I created this situation where I knew that I wanted to use this final shot to metaphorically communicate, sort of like a child storming out of a room and slamming the door, right? I mean, not just that a child does that. I mean, we probably do that all the time, but it's this very sort of like primal emotional reaction that we all clearly understand of walking out of a room and slamming the door in someone's face, and then that sort of situation. Mind you, they didn't have a weird conversation when she went into the room. She was just going to see a patient, right? It just so happened that my dad does this adjusting of his chair thing, very much like how when we get into an emotional tiff, we even feel the need to physically toss off whatever was just pent up in that. And that's why that scene works so powerfully, is because it's communicating on these three different layers: direct communication, indirect communication. So on our conscious understanding, we grasp those two things, but it also communicates to us symbolically and metaphorically, and our subconscious is being spoken direct, and we speak to the subconscious mind, right? So it's not something that most people pick up on, but it's there, and even though most people don't consciously pick up on it, we're absorbing it, and we're getting this deeper meaning and this deeper sense of the message, because I'm leveraging the subconscious dreamlike quality of a film and using metaphor and symbols to communicate deeper emotional experiences that aren't inherently there in the interview, but are being leveraged by the B-roll. Okay? Does that make sense? So those are the different, so essentially that's a primer on the language of video and how a film has the added benefit, because it's a more complicated communication tool, has the added benefit of communicating on more layers. And because of that, the message itself that it is communicating is more powerful, is going to affect the audience deeper and stick with the audience longer. All right, take care.